They said the Blackwood church still smells of rot. Not from the wood or the rain that drips through the cracked ceiling, but from the bones that were buried beneath the floorboards after the wedding that should never have happened. The night of the ceremony, two brides stood before the same altar, mother and daughter, wearing the same yellowed lace, holding the same dying flowers, marrying into the same cursed bloodline. When the vows were spoken, someone in the back pew began to scream, not from fear, but recognition, because in that moment, the living and the dead looked too much alike. Outside, the wind tore through the valley like a voice, calling back the names of the dead Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Mary Ellen. The candles went out one by one, and the mountains seemed to close in, sealing the Blackwoods' fate forever. Long after the ceremony ended, when the last of the guests had limped away on twisted legs, someone returned to the church. They found blood on the altar rail and a single handprint smeared on the glass where the two brides had stood. No one ever learned whose it was. If you're still here, take a breath. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? The valley where it happened lies, buried somewhere between the folds of West Virginia and the forgotten edge of time. Locals call it Blackwood Hollow, though no one dares to mark it on a map. The air there never warms, even in summer. Fog clings to the trees like a living thing, and the soil itself has a memory of blood, of breath, of vows whispered in the wrong names. Old maps from 1832 show the outline of a settlement, a few cabins, and a chapel built of hewn oak. But by 1900, the place had vanished from every county record. The land was purchased, abandoned, resold, and finally erased, as if someone had reached into history and torn the page away. It began, as all curses do, with a man who believed himself chosen. Jeremiah Blackwood, a name spoken only in whispers by those who still remember the way his eyes turned pale when he talked of purity. He led his kin into the wilderness to build what he called God's Valley, a place where blood would never mix with the outside world. At first, it seemed noble, a family seeking peace from the chaos of the new century. But isolation does not breed peace. It breeds echoes, and soon those echoes began to sound like children crying where no children should be. The church, they say, was the first to rot. The wood warped, the floor sank, and a strange grey mold grew up the altar rail. The same sickly tint that began appearing on the family's skin. Every stranger who passed through that valley felt it. The silence, the watching, the sense that something there was remembering you. When the census takers stopped coming, no one noticed. When the letters stopped arriving, no one cared. And when, one autumn, two brides prepared to marry on the same day, a mother and her daughter, no one dared to stop it. Because by then, there were no outsiders left to intervene, only Blackwoods, only blood, and one of them, a 17-year-old girl named Mary Ellen, had already begun to write her story in the margins of a Bible she was never meant to read. The Blackwoods had carved their valley out of wilderness in 1798, building homes from timber that bled sap the color of rust. Jeremiah, the patriarch, believed the outside world had been corrupted by what he called impure blood. He preached to his family beneath the same cross that now stands broken in the ruins. A cross he carved himself, with words no preacher would ever dare repeat. The first winters were brutal. Wolves circled their cabins. Snow sealed them in. And when spring came, they were too far gone to return to civilization. So Jeremiah declared that God had chosen them to remain apart, to preserve his image unspoiled. It was a lie born of pride, and it would become the family's scripture. By the time of the third generation, no outsiders had entered the valley for more than 50 years. The bloodlines looped back upon themselves. Brothers took sisters, fathers took daughters. The children that survived were pale, silent, and slow to learn. The ones that didn't, they were buried under the frost, hardened soil behind the church. Their graves marked only with initials, as if shame could be hidden beneath moss and stone. The Blackwoods no longer spoke like other people. Their words were old and heavy, like a forgotten dialect dragged from the grave. They worshipped at night, in ceremonies that mixed scripture with something far older, something that smelled of iron and earth. They believed the mountains heard them, that the valley itself was alive, pulsing with the same blood that ran through their veins. Those who passed near the ridge in the mid-1800s reported seeing lights in the fog, not lanterns, but pale orbs that moved in silence, rising from the ground like spirits trying to escape the dirt. A trapper who ventured too close found the remains of an infant in a wooden box, its skin faintly blue, its eyes open as if still searching for light. The county sheriff's office filed a report, but when men were sent to investigate, they found no one, only empty cabins, full of rotting furniture and Bibles scrawled over in the same trembling handwriting. Then, one winter night, smoke was seen rising from the valley again, the first sign of life in a decade. And in the spring that followed, 2 brides were named in the record books of the nearest town. One was 17, the other was her mother. No one ever saw either of them alive again. Mary Ellen Blackwood was born in a cabin where the windows never opened and the light never reached the floor. The midwife, an aunt by blood and by something darker, said the child came out gray. Not the gray of death, but of something between life and it. Her cry was weak, a rasp more than a sound, and the walls seemed to tremble when it came. The women present crossed themselves, though none could remember why. Her mother, Catherine, was 34, but looked twice that. Her hair had thinned to the color of straw, and her eyes, when she first saw the child, filled with a terror that she tried to hide behind forced prayer. She whispered the name Mary Ellen, after a sister who had died before her own birth, after another who had gone mad in the same house. There were no toys in the Blackwood homes. The children played with stones, bones, and the discarded feathers of crows. They did not laugh, they mimicked the sounds of the forest. From her earliest years, Mary Ellen would sit by the creek and hum to herself, a tune that none of the others knew, but all somehow recognized. Her mother told her it was the song her grandmother sang before the sickness took her mind. As the child grew, her body remained frail, but her eyes, pale, watery blue, seemed older than her years. She asked questions no one could answer, why the graves behind the church had no names, why some of the family never left their houses, why the air smelled of iron when it rained. Catherine would hush her, whispering that silence was safety, that speaking truth invited the mountain to listen. At night, Mary Ellen would wake screaming. She claimed to see her reflection standing beside her bed, smiling though she herself was not. She said her grandmother visited her in the dark, her mouth sewn shut with thin black thread. Catherine believed her. She had seen those same things once, before her first husband, her uncle, was buried in the frozen ground. By the time Mary Ellen turned 13, whispers had begun again through the hollow. Ezekiel Blackwood, the family's patriarch and Catherine's cousin, had started keeping records. Names, births, deaths, bloodlines, as if the family were livestock. He spoke of God's will, of purity, of continuation, and he watched Mary Ellen closely, The girl was different, too aware, too questioning, in the eyes of men like Ezekiel. That made her dangerous. And in the spring of her 17th year, when the frost began to rot the roots and the creek turned the color of blood, Ezekiel declared that 2 weddings would take place, one for Mary Ellen and one for her mother. By early autumn, the valley was steeped in a quiet dread. Smoke curled from the chimneys again after months of stillness, and the bell above the Blackwood chapel began to toll each dusk, though no one could remember who was ringing it. Ezekiel said it was time to purify what remained of their sacred blood. He spoke in sermons that no longer sounded like scripture, but like commands whispered by something older than man. He gathered the remaining families, fewer than 40 now, all cousins, uncles, half-sisters, and read from his rewritten Bible. The pages were stained with candle wax and what looked like dried blood. The passages he favored were not of love or salvation, but of obedience and sacrifice. In those weeks before the double wedding, the valley felt like it was holding its breath. Catherine stopped speaking entirely. She spent her days at the graves of her lost children, tracing the carved initials with her fingers until the skin split and bled. Sometimes she could be heard humming through the night, the same lullaby Mary Ellen used to sing by the creek, a song that no one else remembered learning. Mary Ellen, locked inside her cabin, began writing again. Her diary, found decades later beneath the warped floorboards, speaks of shadows that moved on their own and of laughter that came from empty rooms. She wrote that her reflection had stopped copying her movements and sometimes lingered after she turned away. The family prepared the brides in silence. Their dresses were hand-me-downs from generations of dead women, yellowed with age and reeking of mildew. Each stitch had been redone so many times the fabric barely held together. When Mary Ellen asked why her mother's dress was identical to hers, Ezekiel told her it was a sign of unity before God. The nights grew colder. The creek froze over early that year, and the moonlight bled silver across the valley. From the hills, distant howls echoed, too human to be wolves. The elders said it was only the wind. The younger ones knew better. On the eve of the ceremony, Ezekiel slaughtered a calf in front of the church. Its blood ran down the steps and into the soil, and he marked the foreheads of the guests with the same crimson smear. He said it would bless the marriages, but those who looked closely saw the same blue, grey hue beneath his own skin, the Blackwood mark, spreading through the family like mold through damp wood. That night, Mary Ellen wrote her last full diary entry before the wedding. I dreamt the valley was breathing. The air moved like lungs beneath the ground. When I woke, I tasted dirt in my mouth, and my mother was standing over me, whispering that we are already dead, only the mountain hasn't buried us yet. And when the sun rose the next morning, the bells rang on their own. The morning of the weddings dawned grey and airless. No birds sang. No wind stirred the frost on the chapel's roof. The mountains loomed close, as if the valley itself were shrinking around the Blackwoods. Inside, the pews were filled with kin, faces pale, eyes glassy, movements slow and synchronized, as though they all shared a single breath. Candles burned low, their wax pooling in the cracks of the wooden altar. And at the center stood Ezekiel, wearing his father's tattered preacher's coat, the one rumored to have been stitched from the lining of a burial shroud. Mary Ellen and her mother, Catherine, entered together, their dresses, the same shade of yellowed white, trailed across the cold floor. Catherine's hands trembled, her lips whispering silent prayers. Mary Ellen did not speak at all. Her eyes, once soft and frightened, had gone vacant, as if she'd already left her body behind. Ezekiel read from the family's holy book, a hand-bound tome no outsider had ever seen. The words he spoke were English only in fragments. The rest was something older, guttural, rhythmic, almost like the chanting of a dead tongue. With every verse, the air thickened. The walls groaned. Somewhere beneath the chapel, something moved. When he reached the vows, he spoke Catherine's name first. She was to marry her brother. The man was pale, expressionless, his skin so thin the veins beneath glowed blue in the candlelight. He never looked at her. When the ring was placed on her trembling hand, she sobbed but did not resist. Then Ezekiel turned to Mary Ellen. He smiled. "The blood must return to its beginning," he said, placing his hand upon her shoulder. And that was when she understood. Her groom was Ezekiel himself. The congregation watched in silence. No gasps, no protest, only slow, synchronized breathing, as if they had all been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in their dreams. Mary Ellen tried to step back, but her mother's hand caught hers. Catherine's eyes, wet with tears, pleaded not for escape, but for acceptance, as though she knew resistance only fed the darkness. Ezekiel recited the final verse. The candles flickered out. Only the glow from the open door remained. Outside, the mountain mist rolled down like smoke, swallowing the chapel steps. And then the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times, though no one touched it. Witnesses later claimed that the sound carried for miles, and that with each toll, something cracked in the earth beneath the Blackwood Valley. Some said it was the chapel's foundation giving way. Others swore it was the soil itself, breathing. When the mist cleared the next day, the building still stood, but inside, no one remained. Only the 2 wedding rings lay upon the altar, half buried in dried blood. The Blackwoods had vanished. For decades, the valley was left untouched. Locals whispered that even the animals refused to cross its borders, that birds flew wide arcs to avoid the tree line, and hunters who strayed too close found their dogs howling, tails between their legs. The path that once led to the Blackwood Chapel grew over with bramble and bone, white weeds. The air itself seemed heavier there, like a lungful of dust and rot. It wasn't until the summer of 1912 that anyone dared return. A surveyor named Thomas Riggs was sent by the county to map the forgotten ridges for potential mining routes. He'd heard the rumors, of course, about the missing family, the Inbred congregation that had vanished overnight. But he'd laughed them off. He didn't laugh for long. Riggs kept a meticulous journal. His first entries described the usual: terrain, soil, elevation. But as he descended into the valley, his notes began to change. On July 3rd, he wrote, "The air is wrong here. Feels thick. Like breathing through cloth. There's a smell of copper when it rains. At night I hear music, though there are no people for miles. It sounds like humming, and sometimes I think it's a woman's voice." 2 days later, he reached what remained of the Blackwood Chapel. The roof had caved in. Moss covered the walls, but the cross still stood, cracked but upright. Inside, he found 2 rings on the altar, exactly as they'd been left half a century before. Beneath them, he uncovered something else, a journal, its pages fused together with blood. The name written on the first page was Mary Ellen Blackwood. The next few pages were still legible. Riggs described one passage in particular. "We are not born of sin. We are born of soil. The mountain keeps what it creates. We only return to the blood that made us." After that entry, Riggs' handwriting became erratic. His words lost structure, devolving into rambling lines about faces in the trees, laughter beneath the earth, and eyes that glowed from the riverbed. His last note, dated July 8th, reads simply, "They're still here. The blood never left. The soil hums when I speak their name." When his team arrived 3 days later, they found his camp abandoned. His compass and maps were scattered on the ground, but there were no footprints leading away. Only his journal lay open on the altar beside the rings, and beside it, a small wooden box. Inside the box was a lock of hair, grey yet freshly cut, in the spring of 1974, almost 60 years after Riggs vanished. A group of anthropology students from the University of Kentucky stumbled upon the Blackwood Valley while conducting a field study on Appalachian burial customs. The locals warned them away, calling the place Hollow of the Blood Trees. But curiosity always finds a way past fear. The group, 5 in total, set up camp near the creek. Within hours they noticed the silence. No birds, no wind. Only the slow drip of water over stone, echoing through the hollow like the heartbeat of something buried alive. They found remnants of the old settlement on the second day. Cabins sunken into the soil, roofs collapsed inward like skulls. The air inside those ruins was colder than the mountain air outside. And when their flashlights cut through the dark, they saw symbols carved into the wood. Crosses, yes, but twisted, their arms bent backward, each engraved with the initials MB. Then they found the chapel. The building was half swallowed by the earth, but the altar still stood. On it, the same 2 rings, now rusted, fused together by time. The students catalogued everything, laughing nervously as they took photographs, unaware that their laughter would be the last sound ever recorded there. That night, they unearthed a shallow grave near the foundation. Inside was a small wooden coffin, perfectly preserved by the damp. The lid bore a single carving Mary Ellen. When they pried it open, what they found did not decay. The body inside, if it could be called a body, was not skeletal. The flesh had turned the color of ash, leathery but intact. Her hair was still woven in 2 braids. Her eyes were open, and beneath her fingertips lay a folded piece of parchment, as if she'd been buried with a message. They unrolled it carefully. The writing was faint, scrawled in what looked like iron pigment. "We were never meant to end. The blood remembers. It only sleeps." By morning, one of the students, a young woman named Abigail Morris, was gone. Her tent was empty, her camera shattered, her journal pages torn and scattered. The remaining 4 fled down the mountain in a panic, reporting what they'd found to authorities in Harlan County. When a recovery team arrived, the coffin was gone. All that remained was a depression in the earth, shaped like a body, and fresh footprints leading into the forest. Bare feet. In 1981, 7 years later, a DNA analysis of the soil samples taken from the site revealed human mitochondrial DNA that matched no known American lineage. It was ancient, predating recorded settlements in the region by centuries. Scientists couldn't explain it, but locals whispered the same thing they always had. The Blackwoods never died. They just went back to the ground, and sometimes, on windless nights, the valley hums, low and rhythmic, like the breath of something dreaming beneath the soil. By the turn of the millennium, the Blackwood Valley had become more myth than memory, a ghost story whispered in backwoods, diners, and county fairs, told to scare children away from wandering too deep into the mountains. But some things refused to stay buried. In 2003, a group of amateur filmmakers from Tennessee decided to document the true legend of the Blackwoods. They hiked in with cameras, metal detectors, and a week's worth of supplies. Their footage, what survived, was later found by a ranger near the old mining road. It began as a typical student project, shaky interviews, laughter, and folklore narration. But by the third day, the tone changed. The camera showed their tense half-collapsed, claw marks on the trees, 5, evenly spaced, too high to belong to any animal known in those parts. One of the men recorded a whispering sound, rhythmic and breathless, coming from beneath the ground. At first, they thought it was wind passing through underground tunnels. But when one of them spoke, the sound mimicked him, repeating his words, distorted and delayed, as if spoken by something in the earth. That night, the footage shows the woman among them, Emily Watts, waking in terror, her camera turned toward the creek. There, in the faint light of her flashlight, a figure stood, small, barefoot, wearing what looked like a decayed white dress. Her hair was braided. Her skin had the faint blue, grey pallor of something that had never truly lived. Emily whispered, "Who are you?" The figure turned slowly. Its eyes were pale, reflective, not white, but shimmering like the belly of a fish. And then, in a voice soft as dust, "Mary Ellen." The recording cut to static. When search teams arrived weeks later, they found only one body. The cameraman, kneeling in the creek bed, his face lifted toward the hills, eyes open and mouth full of soil. The others were never found. Local authorities sealed the valley again, declaring it federal land due to unstable geological conditions. But hikers who wander too close still report strange things. Distant humming, whispers carried on still air, and the sound of bells echoing through the trees, though no chapel stands anymore. And sometimes, they say, they see her, a woman in a wedding dress, her veil tattered with moss, standing by the edge of the creek. Her reflection ripples, but she does not move. Her mouth opens, yet no sound comes, until you speak her name. Then, the humming stops. The forest holds its breath, and for just a moment, you can hear a second voice whisper it back. Mary Ellen. The story of Mary Ellen Blackwood should have ended long ago, buried beneath the weight of time and dust. But some names don't stay in the ground. They move quietly, like roots searching for water, until they find someone willing to remember. In 2018, a folklorist from Charleston named Dr. Helena Cross began researching the Blackwood disappearances for her dissertation on Appalachian hereditary isolation. She spent months tracing property deeds, death records, and census data, only to discover something impossible. The Blackwoods line never ended. The bloodline splintered, scattered across the South under new names Bledsoe, Marin, and Croft. But each branch carried one identical trait. A mitochondrial marker scientists labeled sequence ME after the initials on the old coffin. The same marker found in the soil sample from 1981. The same found, decades earlier, in Thomas Riggs' dried blood on his journal pages. Dr. Cross collected interviews, photos, and parish records. And then, one night in October 2019, she received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a cassette tape, brittle and unlabeled, wrapped in parchment. On it, written in faded ink, "Play this only once." When she pressed play, the recording began with static, then a woman's voice, weak, trembling, singing a lullaby. The same melody that had appeared in every account, every diary, every echo through the generations. After 20 seconds, the singing stopped. A whisper followed, "We are the soil now." But the soil remembers sound. Then silence. That night, Dr. Cross's neighbors reported hearing the toll of a bell coming from her apartment. 3 deep chimes. By morning, she was gone, her desk was overturned, her notes scattered, and on her recorder, a final unfinished note. Mary Ellen is not folklore. She's inheritance. Her body was never found. But on the hardwood floor, investigators noted a strange impression. 2 bare footprints, pressed deep into the dust, facing the door. Since then, anyone who studies the case reports the same recurring dreams. A woman standing knee-deep in a creek, her reflection moving a second too late. She hums, softly, a lullaby older than words. And when you wake, there's dirt beneath your fingernails. They say if you speak her name aloud, truly speak it, not mockingly, but with belief, the sound doesn't end where your voice does. It continues. A half-second echo, like something under the ground whispering it back. Mary Ellen, the last Blackwood bride, the valley's daughter, and the soil that still breathes her name.